Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Marcy Leemore, and I work at the General Alumni Association. And thank all of you so much for joining and for being GAA members. It's because of your membership that we're able to do so much, including webinars like the one today. We've done a quick run-through of this webinar one day last week, and it's possible that you all may have a lot of questions at the end. And so because of that, we're going to save most questions to the end. You can type them in the chat box anytime you like, and I'll sort of be looking at the chat box throughout the call. Some I may stop quickly for, but others I'll like to see if there are trends so that we can capture them all at the end. If we run a few minutes over, that's okay. We'll record. If you need to leave, that's also okay. You can catch the recording next week, but we want to make sure we try to allow time for as many questions as possible. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this webinar over to Steve Shaw.
Good morning, everyone. This is entitled Cents About Cents, subtitle Saving and Investing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that subject today. A little background on me. I'm Steve Shaw. I'm Director of Finance and Administration here at the General Alumni Association. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Business from UNC, class of 1982. I'm a CPA. I've worked in public accounting, private, and publicly traded companies, and being that the GAA is a nonprofit, I also have nonprofit experience. I've been here since 2001. So when you ask, well, why should I listen to you, I do have a little bit of background in what we're going to talk about, and both in my personal practices as well as my work experience. Our goals for today are really to provide some general information to you on how you can manage and plan your own finances, also to provide resources you can use in the future. And at the very end, I'll give you a website where most of this material came from that you'll be able to go back and refer to. Very, very good material that I think will help you as you're moving forward. This is sort of my disclaimer. I know some people like to say, well, what should I invest in right now? Or what should I put money in stocks? Should I put money in bonds? That's really, to give you the best advice there, somebody needs to know your overall financial situation, which I clearly don't. So if you have an investment advisor, or if one of your parents maybe can help you with that, that's a better way to go, and that's not what we're intending for today. So our agenda is, first of all, we're going to talk about budgeting, what that means. Then we'll get into saving and how you can get started, and how you should prioritize your savings goals. And we'll move sort of to the next level, which is retirement saving and investing, and the typical types of employer-sponsored plans that are offered, and then IRAs. And then we'll end up with building wealth and what that means and why that's important. Okay, so the first topic is budgeting. Why is it important to create a budget? Well, first of all, it helps you understand your spending habits. It also gives you a sense of control, because I know a lot of times some of us, I remember especially when I was right out of school, there's a week left till I get paid again and I don't have any money, and I'm like, where did it all go? It makes you accountable to yourself, and most of all, it's important that if your personal goals, when you want to retire, when you want to buy a house, etc., you need to build your savings and your net worth in order to do that. So here are some very fundamental steps in what you should do to create a budget. First of all, you need to determine what your net income is, and that's like what your net paycheck is. And I would like to suggest that you do budgets on a monthly basis. So if you get paid monthly, it's easy. It's whatever you're paid for the month. If you get paid biweekly, you need to do a little calculation, just how much money you're going to have for the month. So that's what you want to do first. Next, you want to track your spending, and I recommend, before you get carried away about what you should spend on things, just continue your normal spending habits, but write down what you spend in sort of categories, and do that I would recommend for 2 months, and that just gives you a sense of where your money's going and how you're spending it. Then at that point, you can say, okay, am I satisfied with how I'm spending my money? I'm going out to eat 5 nights a week, and my going out to eat bill is, $2,000 a month. Am I okay with that? Probably not. So at that point, you set your goals, and then you make a plan, and we're going to talk about what that means in a minute. You adjust your habits, if you don't like how your actual spending is compares to your budget. And then every month you should look at, how you're doing and then tweak those if necessary. The tools to do that, there's no right or wrong tool. It's what works best for you, what you're most comfortable with. Mint is an option. A lot of people use Excel, QuickBooks. I'm sure there's multiple apps that I don't even know about that would work, but it's just whatever works for you that helps you follow your budget. These are some sort of suggested categories, and this is based on actual spending just globally as to how much you should spend on each general category. So, for example, your housing, and that could be either your rent payment or if you have a home, a mortgage payment, should be in somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 35%. Your utilities up to 10%, and then you can see the various categories from there, mostly in ranges. I'm going to show you a couple of different examples here, assuming that you make, what does this mean to you in real dollars? If you make $30,000 a year, which by my estimations you would net about $2,000 a month, then you should be spending around $600 on housing, and again, that could be rent, could be a mortgage payment. Your utilities should be around $150. So if you have a rental property where you don't pay separate utilities, you could still spend up to $750. So you can see an example here of if you're making $30,000 a year and clearing about $2,000 a month, about how much you should spend in each of those categories. And note that I also have a savings figure at the bottom, which we're going to get into more momentarily. Second example on the right is if you're making $50,000 a year, you're probably clearing about $3,000 a month. You can afford a little bit more for housing and utilities, a little bit more for groceries, transportation, etc. So that sort of puts it in real dollar perspective. Okay, savings. What are sort of your how should you prioritize your savings goals? Well, first of all, you want to create an emergency fund, and we're going to talk about what that is. The next would be pay down high interest debt. The next is retirement, and we're going to get into more of that a little bit more, and then short-term and then longer-term goals. A little bit to kind of help you get kick-started. 5 steps to getting started saving. Think 1% at a time. You say, I'm doing my budget. I just don't have any money to save. I just can't save any money. I recommend start small. If you can start small, maybe 1%, or I'm just going to save $50 a month or something. The point is to kind of get in the habit and a routine of putting that money away, getting used to not spending it, and then you can build some momentum. Get analytical about your budget. Are you happy with how much you're spending on housing or how much you're spending on eating out? There's ways maybe you can shave some if you go to Starbucks every day, maybe you don't go every day. That sort of thing you can shave to save some money. This is about prioritizing your future self, because you're going to be responsible for your own financial future, and so you need to start now. Making it automatic is where a lot of banks will allow you to enroll in a program where they automatically deduct money from your checking account and putting it in a savings account, so it happens automatically. You don't have to worry about remembering not to do it or failing to do it. And then also, I recommend going slow and steady. Just try to put a small amount away and continue building that up. What is an emergency fund, and why do you need one? Well, that's if you were to have to lose your job, you were in an accident, or you developed some illness that prevents you from working. That's the type of catastrophic event I'm talking about. Ideally, financial planners say it should equal 6 to 8 months of your net income, and that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. The minimum you should try to establish if you don't have one is about 3 months of your net income. And the other important thing is it should be liquid. That means you can get to it immediately. It's in a savings account. It's something there you could draw it out same day or next day when you need it. Word about disability insurance is, we hear a lot about life insurance, but for most younger folks, certainly under 40 and even under 50, you're much more likely to be disabled, i.e. not able to work, than you are to die, quite frankly. And your ability to work is your biggest income-producing asset. So you should check with your employer. If your employer does not offer disability insurance, you can buy an individual disability policy on the web, through an insurance agent, and that's another way of kind of planning for an emergency. So what type of savings instruments are the most common? First is a regular savings account. Generally, bank requires a minimum balance of $300. That's probably the best instrument for an emergency fund because you can draw that money out like basically on demand. Money market savings, and those banks generally require $2,500, larger balance, and that's if you're planning a big vacation to go to Europe, if you're planning to buy a house and you're saving for a down payment, and it pays a little bit of a higher interest rate. Finally, certificates of deposit, usually the minimum balance for those is about $1,000. Again, that can be saving for a longer term project, but the main thing there is whatever time frame you buy the CD for, you're not going to be able to access that money until it's due.
And again, I want to just remind any of our callers who have just joined that if you have any questions as we're going through the slides, feel free to chat them in the chat box, and I'll capture them and make sure I'm paying attention to when they come in so that we can answer them later or stop throughout if it makes the most sense.
Great. Thank you. Okay, next I talked about paying off high-interest debt. What is high-interest debt? For most of us, it would be a credit card balance we owe. It can also be student loans. The question is often asked, if I don't have an emergency fund and I have high-interest debt, which one should I pay first? Most advisors would say you want to establish that emergency fund of at least 3 months' income first. And again, that's if something bad were to happen that you'd be able to sustain yourself financially for a few months. Once you have that emergency fund in place, then you want to start paying down the highest interest debt that you have. And if at all possible, particularly on a credit card, you always want to make the highest payment you can afford to make, and you always want to make more than the minimum monthly payment on a credit card. Why is that? Well, here's a real example. If you had $5,000 on your credit card and your credit card had an interest rate of 14%, the bank will send you the statement and say you only have to make the minimum monthly payment this month of $100, which is about 2% of the balance. And if you do that, it will take you 22 years to pay off that $5,000, and you will have spent more in interest than the balance that you owed. Now, the bank loves that because they make a whole lot of money on you, but illustrating my point that don't fall into that trap. Try to pay that thing off as quickly as possible. Next level of savings is retirement savings. So we're going to talk about 10 things you want to know about your employer's 401k. Then we're going to talk about IRAs, the type of IRAs there are, diversification and what that means, taking the long-term view, and then what's important about the power of compounding. Okay, first of all, this is a list of 10 things you want to know about your employer's 401k plan. First of all, when can I start contributing? With some employers, there's a waiting period or like a grace period before you can begin contributing, but you want to know what that is. Some employers will enroll you automatically and they're trying to increase their employee participation. Is there a company match? And if so, what are the rules? And this is very critical because you want to maximize whatever you need to contribute to get the highest company match possible. The vesting schedule generally means some employers, you have to be with them for a certain number of years before you're 100% quite vested in the match that they give you. So, for example, some employers may say, if you leave after 1 year, we're going to give you 20% of what we matched. If you're here 2 years, we're going to give you 40% of what we matched. So you have to be here 5 years to get 100%. And that may be critical if you're thinking about changing jobs. How much can you contribute? That's generally limited by dollars, and quite frankly, and it's a federally regulated dollar amount. Most of us don't even have to worry about that. Can you sign up for automatic increases? Some companies will say every January 1st you can automatically bump up your contribution by 0.5%, and you can coordinate that with if you expect to get a raise about the same time, so that in essence your raise goes into your retirement plan. What investment options does the plan offer? That is important for diversification, which we'll talk a little bit about momentarily. is there a Roth 401k option, and I'll get into what a Roth means in a minute. Maintenance and fees, what happens if I withdraw my money early? I can tell you that's not something you want to do. Some employers offer a loan option where you can actually borrow against your balance rather than withdraw it, and then you repay yourself. And that's good to do if you need money for a down payment on a house or something like that. And then finally, what happens to your money if you leave the company? It's your money. Some employers will say, we'll keep it and manage it for you until you're ready to withdraw it at retirement. Some may say, well, if you leave our employment, then you have to roll it over to somebody else. So you want to know how that works. So here's a real life example. Let's say you get offered a $30,000 a year job by an employer. They have a 401k plan that will match 50% of your contribution to the plan up to 6%. Well, what does that mean? So your monthly contribution at 6% would be $150. The employer will match 75 on that. So contributed to your account on a monthly basis would be $225. The important point here is with the employer's contribution, you've already made a 50% return on your investment before you've even invested it. Again, so if you don't max out the employer contribution, you're leaving money on the table. Here's a chart that illustrates the power of compounding and why it's important to save begin saving as early as possible over a long period of time. Okay, the first example is Susan, and this is the dotted line. Susan invests $5,000 annually between the ages of 25 and 35. So she only does it for 10 years. So she's invested $10,000. At age 65, she will have a little over $600,000. And keep in mind, she only saved $50,000 for 10 years. Bill, example number 2, he doesn't start saving until he's 35. He saves until he's 65, and he's invested $150,000. But because he waited 10 years to get started, he's only going to have about $540,000 at retirement. So he saved for 30 years, but because he waited 10 years to get started, he actually has less than Susan, who only saved for 10 years, but started 10 years before he did. The premium example is Chris, who began investing $5,000 a year at age 25. He saved it through age 65, so 40 years, and you can see he has over $1 million available. So, again, it shows the power of compounding and the power of saving over a long period of time. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about what IRAs, and IRAs is an acronym for individual retirement account. There are basically two types. The first is the traditional IRA, where you set up an account with a bank or financial institution. It's your account in your name. The contributions to it may be fully or partially tax deductible. That's primarily going to depend on whether or not your employer offers a retirement plan. Most employers do, so it may not be tax deductible. The earnings on it grow tax-free. You pay tax when you withdraw the money. And this one is the best option if you anticipate when you retire being in a lower tax bracket than you are when you're working. The other option, and this is was certainly newer than the traditional IRA, and that's the Roth IRA. And that's where you contribute money to an IRA. You don't get a deduction for it, but the earnings on it are never taxable to you because you've contributed after tax. So when you withdraw the money, there's no tax consequence to you. It's the best option if you think you'll be in a higher tax bracket after retirement. This has become more and more of an issue of late. People think that that's going to occur. Again, it's impossible for me to tell you which way it's going to work for you. It depends on your personal situation, your earnings, etc. If you don't have a financial advisor, maybe one of your parents can help you make that decision. The other big takeaway here is you can have both kinds. You can have a traditional IRA and you can have a Roth IRA. You can't. So it's okay to have both. One's not exclusive of the other for you. Diversification means how you invest your retirement dollars. So the primary types of investments are stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, which would be things like timber or gold or oil or things like that, and then cash, of course. So why is it important to diversify? Well, first, you want to reduce your exposure to any one type of investment. If you got all your money in real estate, if the real estate market goes bad, then you're in trouble. You know, if you have allocated out sort of on a balanced approach, often one asset class might do better while another one's not doing as well. This also helps reduce the volatility of your investment portfolio over time. And then another thing to consider is you want to balance risk versus reward. The higher risk assets, there's often higher reward for those, but there's also can be higher reward, but there can also be much higher losses. So you want to take some risk. If you put all your money in cash in a savings account and it's paying 0.2%, that's not going to get you where you need to be most likely when it comes time to retire. But on the other hand, you don't want to put it all in commodities, which could, drop dramatically and also prevent you from retiring. This is sort of a scale of lowest risk to highest risk classes of investment, with cash obviously being the lowest risk, commodities being the most risky or having the highest risk. So which diversification profile is right for you? Well, that is the thing with case for most things in life. It sort of depends on what your goals are. How soon do you want to retire? Do you want to retire at 50? Do you plan to work till you're 70? What age you're starting at? Generally speaking, if you're starting your savings for retirement at age 25 and you're planning to work for 30 to 40 years, you can afford to take some risk at a younger age, because if there is a downturn, you have time to sort of make that back, if you will. It also depends on your appetite for risk. Are you risk averse? If it's going to keep you up at night worrying about your money being invested too high risk investment, it's not worth it. And the other thing, quite frankly, is how much you'll pay attention. If it's something you're going to look at periodically and make adjustments to, then okay, you can be a little risky. If not, there's some companies offer what are called target date funds, where you say, I'm planning to retire in the year 2045. So they'll have a target date fund for 2045, and you can put your money in there, and that gets managed. So assuming you retire that year, and what will happen is the money manager will move it to more and more conservative investments the closer you get to 2045. The premise being, at retirement, you don't want to be taking a whole lot of risk with your money, because you want to make sure it's there and it's going to be a stable source of income for you. And then sort of the ultimate thing here is building wealth. So when we do our budget every month and we're managing our income and expenses, that's all about cash flow. People feel like if I'm making my payments every month, then I'm doing okay. But if you don't have anything left over, you're not. And managing your net worth is about building your wealth. And the reality is, the more you save, and especially with retirement savings, the more your net worth will increase. And the greater your net worth is, the more financial independence and freedom you'll have later. So how do you do that? How do you measure that? Well, the easiest way to do that is on an annual basis, is to prepare a personal net worth statement, or you could even call it your own balance sheet. And that's basically where you make a list of, okay, my assets are, I have a savings account, I have a checking account, I have a retirement plan account with my employer, I may have a car that has some value, may have a house, and then, so those are sort of your assets. So that's on the one side, and then on the other side, okay, how much debt do I have? I have to have a student loan, how much is that? Credit card or a car loan, how much is that? A mortgage balance, you write that down. And then so you basically total up the assets, subtract the total liabilities, and whatever that number is, that's your net worth. Early on, it may be, and it's quite frankly for most of us, it's very likely that's going to be a negative amount. I know when I got out of school, had very little savings, had student loans, had a credit card balance, so my net worth was negative. and that's okay. The key is that you increase it over time, meaning that negative amount gets smaller and smaller, and eventually turns positive and continues to grow. And quite frankly, the only realistic way that you're going to be able to do that is to spend less than you make. And again, that's saving through your retirement plan and through your savings account. Again, why is this important? Several rules of thumb that financial planners use is how much will you need at retirement? And again, this is assuming you're going to retire somewhere between 60 and 70 years old. Several rules of thumb. No one's exactly right. It depends on your situation, but most financial planners would say you're going to need around $1 million. Some would say you need 12 times your pre-retirement salary, meaning so the last year that you work, what's your annual salary, you need 12 times that figure. Some would say whatever your pre-retirement income is, you only need about 80 to 90%, which I think that makes a lot of sense because generally speaking, when you're not working, your monthly expenses go down. You know, you don't have commuting expenses. You may not be eating out at lunch as much. You know, your wardrobe requirements may change. You don't have to spend as much on clothes for work or something like that. Two other things to consider in how much you'll have or expect to have at retirement is, will Social Security be available to you? I would say the older you are, the more likely it is that it will be available. The younger you are, the less likely it'll be available at its current rate or plan, if you will, because we know, and Congress talks about this a lot but doesn't do a whole lot about it, the Social Security system is going to run out of funds anywhere from 2030 to 2040 by current estimates. So they're going to have to do something at some point. But so in planning, you want to consider that. And then for some folks who are fortunate, you know, you may be expecting an inheritance from your parents, from another family member. So you want to know, if you're planning on that, you definitely want to know the details on that because it's not something you want to count on if it's not going to be available to you. So in summary, some sort of takeaways from here. You want to develop a budget and you want to stick to it. It's very important to have an emergency fund, and again, you know, a minimum of 3 months, ideally somewhere from 6 to 8 months of your monthly net income. If you have high interest debt, particularly a credit card or a student loan, you want to pay that off as soon as you possibly can. You want to participate in your employer's retirement plan to the extent that you can maximize the matching contribution that they provide to you. And at the end of the day, for most of us, in order to build our wealth, we're going to have to spend less than we make over a period of time, so it's important to start doing that as soon as you possibly can.
And since I know you have another slide?
Got one more slide.
Go ahead, sorry.
Then I mentioned at the very start that I was going to provide you a resource that you can use in the future. And this is a site that Bank of America created in partnership with Saul Khan, who's done a number of online instructional videos or sites, and some of you have probably heard of him. They partnered with Saul Khan to create a site called Better Money Habits. Bank of America is a partner of ours, an affinity partner of ours, and most of what I've just covered comes from this site. I highly recommend you bookmark this. Everything we've talked about you can find here on this site. It's in article form. There's some videos, guidelines that can really help you understand and sort of develop a strategy and a plan in budgeting and in saving. Okay.
Great. So I know we went through that pretty quickly, and there may be a lot of questions. So what I'm going to ask Steve to do is sort of back up from the beginning, and we'll spend a few moments on each slide to see if that prompts people having specific questions on some of the slides that were discussed earlier. Also, you'll notice in the chat box, I've typed the website that Steve mentioned, so you can easily just click on that straight from the chat box if you like. Sorry.
One more.
Sorry. All right. So if you remember, these were the things that were covered in the agenda. Yep. We're just going to go slide by slide again, just as a reminder. I know we moved pretty quickly, and I know for particularly people who are visual learners, you might need a little bit longer to sort of take everything in. And as a reminder, this will also be recorded, or is being recorded, so that you can review it after the webinar is made as well. Steve, we do have one question, which is if like you've made a habit of being a spender, what suggestions, if any, do you have for how you stop doing that? For example, if you're a person who has gotten really used to stopping at Starbucks every single day to get coffee.
Right. Then, well, there's lots of ways to strategize with that. If you're going, and I used to go to Starbucks every day. The first thing to do, I would say, is try to cut back on it. Maybe you go to Starbucks once a week, and you consider that a treat on Thursday or Friday, and then however much you were spending on those other days, you immediately earmark that money to put into a savings account.
And then we have another question. The other question is, if you're in the state retirement plan and you leave state employment, how does that work with your retirement savings?
And I'm not a state employee, but I'm somewhat familiar with that. Generally speaking, you have to be in the state retirement plan for a minimum of 5 years to be vested, if you will. And the state retirement plan is a defined benefit plan. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but it's going to pay you a set dollar amount per month when you reach retirement, largely based on how long you worked. So if you've been with the state 5 or more years at retirement, then when you apply for it, and I think there's some minimum, age and other things that are considered, then you'll get a set dollar amount per month. If you leave the state and go to work for another employer who's non-governmental, you can participate in their plan without any problem. There's nothing to preclude you because you have a state or in the state retirement plan and will benefit from it. You can still participate in a 401k with a different employer. Does that answer? Okay.
Ryan, I think that was your question. If you need more additional detail, just type in the chat and let me know. For right now, we're going to move on to the next question, which is, I recently created a Roth IRA. Do you have any recommendations for asset allocation to balance risk and reward?
As I said earlier, I don't. Other than I don't recommend putting everything in one particular type of asset class. It largely depends on your own tolerance for risk. Depends on how quickly do you want that to grow, depending on when you plan to retire. So beyond just saying generally you want to try to diversify it among stocks, bonds, and real estate commodities, if that's available to you, it's hard for me to give you a more specific answer than that, not knowing your personal situation.
We have another question, or a follow-up question to the state retirement, which is what happens to the money you put in the state plan if you're not at retirement age?
Well, if you've been in the state plan, again, for more than 5 years, you do have the option to draw the money out that's been contributed on your behalf. Or you can take the monthly benefit that you'll have to apply for and that you're eligible for when you reach what they consider retirement age.
Great.
Let me go to another.
Next slide. And I want you all to know, we looked at this slide as a team when Steve did this presentation for us last week, and people were cringing. They were cringing, saying, "Oh my gosh, how in the world can I afford to live on $600 a month in terms of housing?" And we talked about, what is that impact for people who live in cities like New York and San Francisco. And I think the real thing, it was an aha moment for us that, maybe you want or need to have a roommate older than you think you need to be until you get, your debt payments taken care of, or until you get your emergency fund set up. That, again, you want to work to prioritize so that when you are in a good place, your budget reflects this or reflects something that you are proud of. If you're the person who says, "I'm not going to spend 10% on personal care ever, and that's not a priority for me," then of course that gives you more wiggle room in that category. Or if you say, "I have a good friend who is, not young at all, who teases that she still eats like a kindergarten. She says, I eat apples and peanut butter sandwiches almost every day." Her food budget is not going to be $200. So you really have to know yourself and just recognize that these are guidelines, but guidelines that take into account the spending of most people. You want to attach your personal circumstances, and as Steve said, recognizing that when you start off, you may not be able to do all these things in complete alignment.
Right. But that's exactly right. And again, this sort of gives you a sense of proportion, if you will. Like if you're making $50,000 a year and you're looking at a new apartment and it's going to cost $2,000 a month, well, that's probably not going to work. That's going to make it tough to cover the rest of your obligations and quite frankly, things you want to do, going out a little bit and including saving a little bit of money. So this kind of gives you a sense of proportion, if you will.
One of the other things that we talked about is, like, in a longer-term view, the ideal nest egg or emergency fund is closer to 6 to 8 months of your salary. Again, it was one of those things that freaked everyone out. We're like, wait, I feel like I only have like $30 in savings, and the idea of having 6 to 8 times my monthly salary was frightening to people. So depending on where you are, as Steve said on the last slide and this slide, which is start small. Think about it in 1%. Think about it in $10. Think about it in $50 until you get to the place where you really are at that wonderfully protective emergency fund for yourself, and recognizing that when you're working to pay off the high debt, that you still want to have some cushion while you're doing that, because anything could happen even while you're paying off the high debt. And the last thing you want is to then have no savings and still have high debt, and you're really, as they say, up the creek without a paddle.
Right. And again, because, for most of us, our biggest asset is our ability to work. And again, that's why it's important to have not only the emergency savings, but to make sure that you have disability insurance coverage in the event that you're unable to work because of an injury or an illness. The other thing I'd say about this emergency savings fund, and again, it does sound like a lot of money, as I kind of alluded to on a few other things, you have to take the long view and be patient with yourself. You may say, it's going to take me 2 years to get to that figure, and that's okay if that's how long it's going to take. The point is that you're making progress, and I think you'll find as you build momentum, it gets a little easier, and you'll start feeling more of a sense of control, and a sense of, and quite frankly, a little more confidence as you do that.
Just wanted to pause here, just see if there are any questions around savings instruments.
And again, this is the single biggest example of why high interest debt can really hurt you, and if you don't get it taken care of as soon as you can.
One of the things I often recommend to new employees or younger employees is to immediately start contributing to your retirement before you see the money in your check. You know, people always say, I'm going to wait, 2 years, I'm going to work 2 years, I feel really strapped, I'm going to work 2 years, and then I'll start retiring. Or I'm going to wait to saving for retirement, or I'm going to wait until I pay off this credit card bill, and then I'm going to save for retirement. As Steve said, start small, and I say start immediately, because you won't know what you're missing if when you immediately start a new job, you just sign up for the retirement plan and have money taken out of your check. You will learn to live off of less, and you will be much more grateful to yourself down the line when you start to see how your retirement investment counts have grown.
And to Marcy's point, if I wait a year before I start participating in the retirement plan that my employer offers, in this scenario that we have up, then I will have lost almost $1,000 that my employer would have contributed to my account if I had been participating for that 1 year period at a $75 a month match.
Which right now it just seems like $1,000. But when you think about the next chart that shows this person contributing $5,000 a year, and we often say, even if you didn't contribute $5,000, if you contributed $1,000 a year until you can do $5,000 a year, your arc is going to look way more favorably than the person who starts later. So even if you say, oh man, I can't do $5,000 a year, you could potentially do what the previous slide was, and you're doing $1,000 a year, and that also is going to have compound interest and value for you over the long haul.
Yeah. To Marcy's point, the earlier you start and the longer you continue it, compounding is going to work to your advantage and help build your savings.
And one thing Steve mentioned last week that he mentioned briefly is most people do expect to be in a lower tax bracket after retirement. In theory, you will be making less money when you retire or earning less money actively when you retire than when you are working. Yes, there are people that are exceptions to that rule, but most of us are earning less in retirement, which means it drops us into a lower tax bracket, which means when you start withdrawing the money from your retirement account after you retire, instead of being taxed as if you are 30 and at the highlight of your earning career, or 50 and at the highlight of your earning career, you are now at 70 and, saying, hey, I only take in $500 a year in terms of active earning, and the tax is so much more favorable to you at that time. So just keep that in mind. Again, this is, one of the pros and cons of like the traditional IRA versus the Roth IRA, and they both have pros and cons.
Right.
And again, I have both, and several people do have both. So there is nothing wrong with having both. You really need to talk to your personal advisor or know your retirement goals or set some retirement goals so that you can actually decide the best thing to do.
This one I would say, and just people I know and what I read, this is where probably a lot of people miss the boat, so to speak. You know, they even if, let's say, they do a monthly budget and they follow that pretty well, this is sort of your scorecard. And again, I recommend on an annual basis to tell, you know, where are you headed? Where are you headed? You know, just because you're meeting your monthly expenses, that doesn't mean you're building enough savings and wealth that will allow you to retire or cut back and work part-time or something like that. So this is really where what gives you the scorecard to say, you know, am I building wealth, which is going to give me more financial freedom and financial independence. And as I said, if you're just out of school or a few years out of school, that number is very likely to be negative, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. Mine was, you know, the important point is that you have a plan, and over several year period, you're turning that to a smaller negative number, eventually to a positive number, and that you're growing it. And these can be scary numbers as well, but keep in mind if you're 25, you know, you have 40 years or thereabouts to get to these figures.
We have a question that says, and it's referencing this slide, that, you know, it says 1 million is a rule of thumb for retirement. If you're planning for 2 people, like a married couple, does this mean that the plan needs to be 2 million combined?
Correct. Yeah, this is on like a per person basis.
So we've reached the end of our deck again, and we have about 10 more minutes. I just want to make sure there aren't any additional questions before we wrap up this call, or if you have suggestions for follow-up topics that you'd like to see a webinar on, feel free to chat those in the box as well. Financial literacy is one place that one of our participants struggles. Are there any books, blogs, et cetera, that you would recommend?
I would recommend the website that we gave, bettermoneyhabits.bankofamerica.com. Everything we've talked about today, you can find at this website. Again, there's short articles about it. There's some short videos on each topic. So depending on what your learning style is, there's more than one way to learn about it on each of those categories.
I'll also say I have no financial background, so take the advice I'm about to give with a grain of salt. I went to see a fee per service. I can't remember what it's called.
Fee-based.
Thank you. A fee-based investment planner, which is someone who charges you by the hour to spend time with them instead of someone who makes money off of your investments or by selling you certain merchandise or getting you to buy, you know, life insurance and all sorts of other things that they may have partnerships with in certain companies. So I went to see one of them, and she really recommended a lot of great books. I happen to have a few of those here, and I'll type them in the chat box as well. One of them was Smart Women Finish Rich by David Bach. One of them is Your Money or Your Life by Joe Dominguez and Vicki Robbins. The third book she recommended was The Four Pillars of Investing by William Bernstein. And she gave me a list of several others, but it was such a long list that I asked her, I said, well, what would be the top 3 of this list that you think would give me a pretty solid investment place to start? And those were her recommendations. And like I said, I will type those in the chat box as well. But that is, you know, from a person, even though she told me, you're hearing it from me, so I have the disclaimer that I do not have a financial background, and therefore it is just like your friend recommending it, not someone with any real expertise.
And the other nice thing about this site is, you know, you can see the topics are listed at the bottom in little boxes. If you're thinking, if something pops in your head about what should I do about, you know, whatever topic, credit, debt, you know, just some retirement particular topic, you can go click here and probably find a little short article or a short 2 or 3 minute video on that specific topic. So it's a very good reference site.
Any final questions out there? Well, great. We'll thank all of you so much for participating today. I'm sure some of you will look at our webinar. If you have any other suggestions or questions, please feel free to email me, or you can email, how about this? Email me, and I'm putting my email address in the chat box. Please do email if you have any additional questions or suggestions. Once again, we thank you so much for being GAA members, and we thank you for taking time to join today's webinar. Have a great day.